Hello YouTube. Today we have a book and an iPhone 5C. So if you can't tell already, this book, it has an iPhone on the front and it's about the App Store. And at the time when this book was released around 2009, 2010, this was intended as a kind of guide to see what sort of apps you could install if you need something or if you just want some games. Nowadays it's more like an archive because some of these apps probably haven't survived over time. They could have been deleted or they just lost developer support. And this acts as a hard copy archive for those apps. And what's interesting is that there's also screenshots of many of the apps, and there's a whole bunch of detailed information, including the release date, the price, things like that. So it's an interesting little archive of the early App Store. So with the goal of this series, we're going to be taking a look at every single section this book has to offer. Now, of course, some of these sections aren't as interesting as others, but the apps themselves, it'll be interesting to see if they have survived over time. We'll go in the order of the book. Now, by far, the games category has the most, but we'll be taking a look at the beginning, and ironically enough, it's about books. Of course, ebooks or audiobooks, things like that. We'll be taking a look at that. And the goal of the iPhone, of course, it being a 5C, it still has the same home button. But the point of this, it's a 32-bit device, and we'll be seeing if these apps are actually still in the App Store. The front cover itself is pretty plain. It's just the front of a 3G or 3GS. But one interesting thing to point is that instead of a mail application, it's the App Store, and it makes sense because it's a book about the App Store. And instead of being the typical iPhone time of 9:41 a.m., it's 10:32. I don't know why, but interesting to point that out. On the back, it just gives some information about, it's a book about apps. Over 300 of them were reviewed. This definitely dates it because it was sold at Borders, of all places. I guess now we just take a look at the actual book. So when you first open up the book, there's of course the title page again, I guess, the publisher information, the contents, and for this series we'll be looking at the contents in order because there's quite a lot in this book, and I would start with something more interesting like games, but that is one of the largest sections in the entire book. So it'll just be easier and more convenient as well to go in order. So first off, it gives us an introduction from the editor and as well as how to use this book. And the first section we'll be taking a look at in this episode, ironically enough, is books. So in the introduction, it's basically saying their experience with technology and how they've been using it over the years. And this was published September of 2009. So again, that's when this book was released, around 2009, 2010. And after that, basically has information on how to actually read this. It's pretty self-explanatory, but again, it's still nice to have. First off, we have books. One of these is definitely still around, Kindle for iPhone. Now, that logo probably hasn't been used in quite a while, but that is probably something that is still in the App Store. And the other one, just called audiobooks. It would actually be interesting if this is still around. It probably isn't, knowing the state of many of these apps. But again, that's why this is here, so we can check it out. So this first app, Audiobooks, is actually still around by CrossForward Consulting. And it's just interesting to see the before and after from iOS 3-4 days to nowadays. It just makes me wonder how many more of these apps actually do exist, even though it may seem like they wouldn't. The other interesting part about this is that these are older apps, and of course, that means they would support older iOS versions. So even though it's not the latest and greatest, you could still probably pretty easily download the older versions by just trying to download it on an older device and then asking for the last compatible version. And that means you could still use these apps on an older iOS device. And of course, next we have the Kindle app, and the only real different thing is that instead of being called Kindle for iPhone, it's now called Amazon Kindle. And the icon itself, at least the person reading the book, I guess, it's been flipped and there's no more tree or Amazon logo, but it is still kind of similar. And of course, with the screenshots of back in 2009 and nowadays, it has had quite a big change to fit newer iOS standards. And no, I did not ruin or rip the book or anything, just letting you guys know so you don't have to leave a comment saying I ripped it or something. It was just the paper being paper while I was moving the 5C. But now let's move on to the next app, and we have short covers and Stanza. They do look a lot like iOS 6 and below apps. At this point, I don't really know what to assume because these apps could probably still be around. So with the next app, Short Covers, it says around December of 2009, they partnered with Borders and they renamed it to Kobo. And well, at this point, Borders is defunct and now it must have been purchased by a separate entity, but the app is still technically on the App Store. Now, it may not be the original one from when it was still Short Covers, but it does technically still exist. This next app, Stanza, I could not find it on the App Store, and by going to their website, it seems like it was last updated in 2009. So they feature a 3GS here, and they have the same type of screenshots, and it just seems like this website was abandoned because nothing has really been updated. If you go to the Stanza link here to download it, and you need iPhone OS 2.0 or something newer, if you go here, it just says page not found. And if you go back to the forums, it says they were created around 1 year ago, 3 years ago, but if you actually take a look at them, such as this one, it has a date of 2010. So I am not entirely sure what this is about. It seems like this website was left abandoned, and you can't even click on news or blog, so there isn't really any sort of information. Kind of weird. I wonder if we'll find more websites like this where they've just been left abandoned. So we've reached the point, at least of this specific genre, where they have these app capsules, and it's basically like a compressed form of apps or whatever else they decide to show at the end. And we'll just take a quick look at these. The only real image they show is one screenshot from the app. They don't have an icon or anything, but they still do have the developer, the price, the release date, and a little bit of information about it. And for the first app, Classics, it does still exist. It seems like it was last updated in 2017. Not exactly the newest version, but not fully abandoned, I guess. It requires iOS 8 or later. So for Shakespeare, why do I have Scanner Pro opened? Well, this is the same developer that made the app initially, and if we look at what they actually still have, it does not seem like they kept it around. So it seems like they've just been focusing on productivity software. There are other Shakespeare apps, there's a lot of them, but this particular one is not on the App Store anymore. So for the Books app with a Z, I can't really find that much information on it, and it seems like it's just gone from the App Store. It clearly doesn't show up, and it might just be one of those apps that are gone. The next app is iPhone, the Missing Manual, and this is by the same developer with the abandoned website, so I could not find an app that is actually titled this, but if you go into the iTunes store, you can find a book with the same name. It's by a different developer, but it is the same name, and it is actually still updated. At least the newest version I found is for the iPhone 11. It does technically exist, but it's not by the same developer, and it's not its own separate app. So this next one, Security for People and Computers, I cannot find anything within the App Store or the iTunes Store, so even if this was a book, I can't find this exact version, so it seems like this is another one of those where it's kind of been abandoned. This next one, iRiddles, it seems like it's also been kind of abandoned. It's one of those early iOS apps where it starts with the I. There are other riddle apps, I guess, that do exist, puzzle apps, but this particular one from 2008 seems like it does not exist anymore, or at least not natively on the App Store. With Wattpad, this app does still exist, and it's an editor's choice app, so this app has aged well. It seems like it's still getting regular updates, and it's still pretty popular. And finally, for the last app in the books category, iPhone Secrets Lite, this is another abandoned app because it does not show anything in the App Store, and if you try to look it up in the iTunes Store, it doesn't show anything either, except for a guide for iOS 7, which is still $3 because you can learn all about the cool new features Apple developed in iOS 7. And that's pretty much it for this first episode. We took a look at the books category, and I was at least surprised with some of the results. we found that the developer LexCycle seemingly just abandons their website. But with this, hopefully this was a pretty interesting look back at some of these apps. And in the future, we will definitely take a look at some more. The next episode will be all about business, which is very exciting. But it is still interesting to see if these apps do exist, and at least you get to see what the apps used to look like. So that's also cool. And we do have quite a bit of apps to look at. If you guys want to see more, then be sure to subscribe and stick around for that. And as always, thanks for watching.